From the Himalayas to the spice gardens of the southern shores, the dry plains of Rajasthan to the jungle territories of the eastern borders, India is truly a vast country. The diversity of India's geography is reflected in the diversity of its many creeds. Ancient faiths like Buddhism and Hinduism rub shoulder with relative newcomers like Islam and Christianity. Then there are many forms of spiritualism which also thrive here. Scottish historian William Dalrymple has been exploring India for over 25 years, and in this book, Nine Lives, he has asked believers to tell him their stories. So let's start the review of this book. Jainism is one of the world's oldest religion, dating back to the 3rd century BCE. It emerged in the Ganges basin, a vast valley connecting the Himalayas to the Bay of Bengal. This basin isn't just the heartland of Jainism, though it's also the cradle of Hinduism and Buddhism. These three creeds have an entangled history. All three religions have significant traditions of asceticism, the rejection of worldly attachments, and the practice of self discipline. In ancient India, Jain monks were famous for their refusal to wash. An early description of a Jain monk depicted him as being so dirty he looked as if he were wearing a closely fitting suit of black armor. Jain monks in contemporary India are allowed to wipe themselves with a wet towel, but bathing in running water and the use of soap are forbidden. Jains are equally strict when it comes to the other ascetic practices. While Buddhist monks shave their heads, Jain monks pluck the hair out by the root. The term Jain itself comes from Jina, a Sanskrit word meaning liberator or spiritual conqueror. One of the earliest prominent converts to Jainism was 3rd century BCE Emperor Chandragupta Maurya. The faith showed him the vanity of this world's success and the sinfulness of the actions that had brought him that success. In atonement, Maurya fasted himself to death. In the 10th century CE, a Jain general called Prince Bahubali also renounced this worldly ambition. He retreated into the jungle and spent the year in meditation while standing perfectly still. Eventually, vines grew around his feet and tied him to the spot. Jain considered him the first human to achieve moksha, and his statue is one of the holiest Jain sites in India. In one of the visits to the Jain temples, author met Prasannamati Mataji, a tiny bald nun in a white sari, climbing up the steps to the statue's base. Before setting her bare feet on the stone steps, Mataji gently brushed the surface with a feather, a measure to ensure she didn't harm or kill a single insect. The next day, Mataji explained her faith to the author. All attachments, she began, bring sufferings, which is why Jains, like her, give them up. This principle had led her to leave her family and give away all that she owned. For many years, she had wandered India's roads, leading a life devoted to ahimsa and compassion toward all. 20 of these years had been spent with another nun called Prayogmati. When Prayogmati became seriously ill, she didn't struggle against his illness. Instead, she followed Maurya's example and embraced Santhara, a voluntarily fast ending in death. Unlike suicide, which Jain regard as a sin, Santhara is not a death of despair. Rather, it is about embracing the passage into the next life. Now let's talk about Kerala. Kerala is one of the most socially oppressive states in India. The caste system in Kerala was long notorious not just for the rigid hierarchies but for the violence with which they were policed. In early 19th century, a British traveler called Francis Buchanan noted that the members of the highest castes were within their rights to behead the lower caste men if he dared to step foot on the same road as his socially superiors. Buchanan also documented the detailed legal codes that governed every aspect of lower castes people. Take it from the Haridas, a Keralan Dalit whom the author interviewed. A part-time laborer, Das digs wells for members of higher castes. When these employers serve their Dalits worker lunch, they use extra long ladles to pass them their food as a safe distance. Typically, they also use plantain leaves to prevent their hands touching any utensil touched by a Dalit. Once the labour are done, the utensils are thrown away. Dalits drawing water from the well they themselves dug, meanwhile, is strictly taboo. Thayyam ceremonies allow Dalits to voice their complaints against upper caste. When the author first met Haridas, he was not wearing a day labor dress. He was lying flat on a palm mat in a simple hut. Das wore nothing but a white lungi. A young boy stooped over him, applying bright makeup to his face and body. His torso was covered in yellow paint, while his cheeks were smeared with pungent smelling orange turmeric. Paisley patterns circled his eyes, with white rice paste spots and thin red strips completing the effect. This was the first stage of Das' transformation into Vishnu, the Hindu god who would possess him during the Thayyam ceremony for which he was preparing himself. The term Thayyam comes from the Sanskrit word Devam, meaning god. During the ceremony, Hindu gods incarnate themselves into the bodies of dancers. They choose Dalits like the Haridas rather than their social superior for a simple reason. These gods, like the oppressed lower castes, are appalled at the injustices committed by the higher castes. These ceremonies help Dalits voice their complaints against the ruling castes. Now let's talk about Buddhism. The Buddha laid out four things that must be avoided in life: desire, greed, pride, and attachment. These passions bring nothing but strife and misery. Worse, they are illusions. This idea was first and most important lesson Pasang, a young boy, learned in the monastery. Of course, letting go of desire, greed, pride, and attachment is difficult, but there were ways to help a young man like Pasang forget about these things. There are techniques like meditation and memorizing holy scriptures. Isolation is another technique. After 3 years of instructions, Pasang was sent to a cave in the mountains. To spend 4 months learning the value of solitude, Pasang performed 4,000 prostrations a day and prayed until hunger and fatigue finally overwhelmed him. After drinking some butter tea and eating a frugal meal, he fell asleep and the cycle repeated itself. Lonely and scared, Pasang's first week in the cave was miserable. After 14 days, though, something did change. Suddenly, he grasped the vanity of pleasures and ambitions. His mind was clear, and he felt his sins being washed away. The hermit's life had purified him. Now, let's talk about bowls. Ascetic creed draws on ancient Indian religious traditions. These men are called bowls, meaning madmen in Bengali. Over 500 years, these wandering minstrels have traveled northeastern India's roads, stopping only to perform their songs. Bowls are not just musicians, though their art is a mean of teaching an esoteric spiritual philosophy. God, Baul, belief, does not dwell in bronze or stone idols, nor will you find him or her in heaven or afterlife. God can only be found in the bodies of men and women who seek truth here and now. Provided you are willing to give up your worldly possessions, take to the road and follow the path of love, and you will find God. The Baul's doctrine meld influence from India's many different religious traditions. On their journey, Bauls stop to pray in temples and mosques. They worship Hindu deities like Krishna and draws on the wisdom contained in the text of Buddhism and Muslims, ascetics known as Sufis. They see it no single creed can hope to exhaust the truth of God. They all, however, contain valuable clues and signposts that can guide the attentive toward Monar Manush, the form of enlightenment known to those who have learned to love God from their own heart. What is God and how this universe came into being? Bowls do not believe there is a final answer to this question. In this regard, they draw on ancient humanist tradition in India. Take the Rig Veda, a collection of Sanskrit hymns composed over 3000 years ago. Like the bowls, this text leaves questions about the origin of the universe open. Maybe it states the world created itself, but maybe it did not. Only God, it adds, knows, but then again, perhaps he does not know. Well, in the end, we can say so that humans have made so many different paths, but his search is common, and that is to find eternal peace. Thanks.